Welcome, everyone. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Tell us where you are. We are so excited to have you all here today. It's really a great pleasure for us. Allow me to introduce myself to you. I am Hayat, a founding member of the Society and a member of the Secretariat of the Society of Gender Professionals. For those of you who you might know SGP, or if you are new to our association, we are an international association of gender practitioners, academics, and activists dedicated to promoting feminist action and applied research and raising the profile of gender expertise worldwide. We organize gender cafes periodically every couple of months, which these are non-hierarchical learning events designed to speak new feminist theories and research, advocacy, and social change. And today we are sharing with you some of these practices, and we'd like to hear from you also about resources and how to create participatory online learning spaces, and yeah, through this interactive session. We have organized a couple of gender cafes before on different topics, breaking gender binaries, championing feminist organizational change, reclaiming self-care, gendering evaluation frameworks, and we have another gender cafe next week as well. So we look forward to this event. Next slide, please. Just to give you some an idea about the agenda today, we'll have an interactive session planned. So we so much look forward for your participation. We'll kick off with a brief introduction about SGP, and then we'll do a short get-to-know activity before we introduce our panelists, who will share their experiences on planning and facilitating inclusive, collaborative virtual events. Then we'll have the time to go into breakout rooms where we will share and we'll talk to you and hear from you as well from your experiences. Next slide. So before we begin this gender cafe, I want to quickly introduce you to the Society of Gender Professional. For those of you who might not be so familiar with us, SGP is as I mentioned, an international association of gender practitioners, academists, activists. The association is dedicated to promote feminist action, applied research, and raise the profile of gender expertise around the world. You can see on the screen our mission and the different objectives of the association, which are so related to collaboration with members, network building, mentoring, and leadership, and advance gender equality, and more. Next slide. We have two main types of engagement. We have those who are full members and who pay small membership fees and receive access to all SGP work, activities, contribute to building the organizations, and they pay a very minimal amount of that is equivalent to eating out one meal in their local community. And we have those who follow our work via email, attending open access events, follow us on Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn. And of course, not to forget that those who are new to SGP and are part of today's event, for example. We have 233 members, and we have nearly 10 times as many followers subscribed to SGP newsletter. We are active in social media, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And of course, we have more than, let's say, about 15,000 contacts through our different channels. Next slide. The previous one. Okay. So gender cafes is one of our main activities to foster the production and dissemination of applied gender research. We have a gender cafe every couple of months. It's like virtual conversation series connecting gender practitioners, academics, and activists through a specific topic, and that is led by our members. And this is an example of one of these gender cafes, and you can access our various previous gender cafes by accessing our SGP website. Next slide, please. So before I introduce our wonderful moderator, let me quickly explain that we are currently at the same Zoom room. But after the discussion with the panelists, we'll go into separate rooms where every one of you will get this message to join a breakout room session to have more interactive discussion.
Hello.
That is open to all.
How are you doing? I'm okay. How are you? Good.
So can
Good.
okay. So next slide. So let me turn it over to my colleague Christy. Christy is a co-president of the Society of Gender Professional and the founding member since the very early, the very beginning of SGP, and she's very involved in our different gender cafes as well. Please, the floor is yours, Christy.
Thank you so much, Hayat, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We're very excited to be presenting at CSW and have this opportunity to get to know all of you as well. So our little get to know each other event today will be using a tool called Mentimeter. You can log into it in two ways. You can either go to www.menti.com and then you will see this space here, at which point you will log in the code that you can see. The other option is to go to menti.com and the second link that's there, which we're putting in the chat here, and you'll have a question pop up on your screen. What makes virtual spaces collaborative and inclusive? So let me ask my colleague Ritu to share her screen so you can see this activity taking place. In the chat, you will see the link. So if you want to pull up that link and click on www.menti.com/QC3 EP as in puppy, U, Z, 1KV as in victory.
Thank you, Christy. Can you just give me a thumbs up or a confirmation if you can see my screen?
We're good. So the question is, what makes virtual spaces collaborative and inclusive?
And Saira has also put the link on the chat. You can directly click on the link as well.
It's great to see all of the different words and phrases showing up here. We'll give it a few more minutes. About 14 people have had a chance to contribute. Look at the international language, caring, sharing values. A respect, accessibility, pronoun seems to be showing up as a pretty common set of requirements, letting go of assumptions, shared values, clear topic, planning, yes, breakout rooms, intentional language. This is wonderful. 16 people have shared. If you're not able to get into the menti.com, but you want to share your words in the chat, we'll look at those as well. Dialogue, sharing, communication, empathy, exchange, empowering, open minds, honesty, audience networks, diversity, geographically accessible. It's really great. Feminism, committed. That's great. Has everyone been able to add? Looks like one more. Planning. This is wonderful. Shall we go on to the second question, Ritu? Oh, great. Time zone equality. Thank you, Daniel. Yes. Great ideas. These are really wonderful. And I think our panelists will have a lot to work with here when we get to that portion. So we're going to open up the second question for you, which is what makes virtual spaces safe? So the first question was on collaborative and inclusive, and the second question, what makes virtual spaces safe? So hopefully that has shown up on your screen at this point and you're able to put questions in again, your answers. This is great. Optional is a good one from Emily in the chat video. Physical safety, respect, accountability, inclusivity, privacy, trust, honesty, valuing diversity, shared values, time zones, empathy, tolerance, acceptance, openness, confidentiality, anonymity or pseudonyms. Great, really great. Physical safety, intentionality, anonymous notes. Yep, those are wonderful. Permission for recordings, clear norms, connect, awareness, dialogue, password protection, so important, clear settings, technology, mutuality, option for privacy. It's interesting, privacy is showing up in a variety of frameworks here. And thinking about what that means in different contexts is really important to the conversation today. Great. Thank you so much. We'll do a capture of these so that we can share them out after the event today, but also looking forward to hearing our panelists as they engage us in conversation around these issues. So let me share my screen again, go back to that. And we're going to now introduce our panelists. And we have some guiding questions for them. But if you also have questions or comments, resources, tips that you'd like to share in the chat, we'll just keep that going. So first of all, let me introduce everyone who's here today. I'm Christy. I've already introduced myself. I'm zooming in from Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and I'm a member of the Secretariat of SGP. We also have Kelly, who is joining us shortly. She will be zooming in from Saudi Arabia. Angela, we're really excited to have here as one of our collaborators. Angela is zooming in from the US and is a member of COFEM, which is an organization, a network of feminists working around the world to end violence against women and girls. And COFEM is one of our important Gender Cafe organizers in some regards. We have Daniel, who's joined the SGP recently as a secretariat member, zooming in from the Philippines. Syra is here, who is zooming in from Canada, also our comms specialist on SGP. Hayat, who you've already met, is zooming in from Jordan. We have Ritu, who is a co-president of Society for Gender Professionals, zooming in from India. Kenneth, who's zooming in from the US as well, from Rhode Island, is our technology lead and manages all of our website and database support. And then we're really excited to also have Z, who is zooming in today from Nigeria, who is also a member of COFEM. So you'll see them in the chat and hopefully meet them in some of the breakout rooms as well. So let's get on to this conversation. Our questions for the panelists. First question. So I'm interested in organizing a virtual event, but I don't know where to start. What do I need to know? I'm going to throw this first question to Hayat and Syra for you to answer. You can decide who wants to answer first.
Well, I will jump in with the first consideration I think we always start with. And please mute yourself if you have some noise in the background. And also, yeah, so first question we want to ask ourselves is, who are we trying to reach? So who is the audience that we're trying to speak to? And then that really shapes how we plan our event. So who needs this information? Who are we targeting with this information? And who would benefit from being around the table? And also, who gets to speak? Who gets that platform? So once we have an idea of who we're speaking to and what our messaging is, then we can start planning, okay, what are the timelines we need to work toward? And time zones have been mentioned. And I will say that one of the ways that we get around having a global audience, and then you have so many time zones, how do you choose? One of the ways that we've worked with this at SGP is that when we have membership meetings twice a year, it's usually around January, February, and then July, August, we'll have on that day 3 different opportunities. So it's not one membership meeting, it's 3 membership meetings. And using the New York time zone, the CSW time, one will be early in the morning and one in the middle of the day. And that allows for a greater spread of participation. Obviously, reporting out then has to be compiled because we don't have all of the same board members and committee volunteers at each membership meeting, and we have different members at each meeting. So then what we send out to our membership at the end is a compilation of the notes from those 3 events. Now, that's possible if you have the resources. Maybe you can only do a recording, for instance, to share out because you don't have the capacity to be able to put on the event multiple times. But at least that gives the option of sharing that information further from the people who are finding your timing convenient and can join. And also, as we use different tools to figure out what is the timing, some of it is informal research. You can talk to your stakeholders and see what would be most appropriate. Are you speaking to an audience that is working in organizations where they're coming as part of their job? Should it be during the day, during the week, or is it a grassroots audience and evenings would be better? You can determine that in conversation, or you can also do polls online to figure out what are the good timings to be more inclusive. But I can say from our last experience of a membership meeting, having the capacity to put on events at a time zone that is accessible to people that are very far away from where that meeting is hosted was really appreciated. So we had a lot of great feedback from folks in the Pacific and Australia region that they often feel a bit left out. So this is an important consideration. And who speaks also? we shouldn't also consider that, you know, we want to be more inclusive and let's find somebody who can speak to trans issues because they have the lived experience. Let's also think, okay, we have a speaker with a disability, we have a speaker who can speak to trans issues, but they have expertise on other issues. So inclusion is also looking at the individuals for their expertise and not only for their identity. Hayat, some thoughts from your side?
Thank you, Sarah. I think you covered a lot of important things, and I would like to also comment on the messaging part. It's one of the important things to understand what, aside from, it's part of understanding your audience, also what is the message or what is the goal that is behind this event or this virtual event. It's important to understand that, and throughout our experience, we start to see like it's not only enough to think of this goal from your point of view. It's important to go out and to put yourself in the place of your audience and to see what would they expect or what would like to know from that event. And another important thing is also sometimes you need to consider that it takes time, and of course to understand what is exactly the time that you need for planning the event. You need to select the speaker. The speakers need to talk to each other to understand what everyone is talking about and how they complement each other and how to fill the gaps they want to share. And yeah, so it's but another, I think one last point that I think is important is you should not have all the experience to run a virtual event, or even, let's say, in the example of the Gender Cafe. Sometimes you are interested to know about specific topics, so you could do the exercise of finding experts about to talk about the event, and you can just organize an event around that topic so that you can gain experience. Also, remember to that the people who are attending also have a full of important information, important experience. So give them also the room to share theirs as well. So, yeah.
That's very important, and something we try to emphasize in SGP spaces, where, you know, you'll start with a rule of thumb that presentations from a panel or the facilitated portion will be, you know, half of the time allotted, or, you know, at the very least we leave a third of the time for discussion and breakouts, so that participants also get to share their experience. So it's not only one direction, but that people get to engage and input as well.
Thank you so much to both of you. I'm putting in the chat message that we've shared some files under the CSW event page for this, so that you can download some of those documents and share with us your best practices about organizing an event. Having worked with Hayat and the team, I can tell you that for each of our events, it takes about 100 hours of work behind the scenes to make each event work smoothly in front. So knowing, of course, that time is really important. We're now going to ask question number 2. It's actually a set of questions, and we're going to throw this one to Angela and Z from COFEM. What makes events collaborative? What makes them inclusive? And what are some of the best practices for designing collaborative and inclusive virtual events?
I'll kick off that question. Thank you, Christy, for passing over. So I think that we all know that facilitating engaging in effective virtual events is very different from in-person events, right? Which a lot of us were used to prior to COVID. I think that for networks like COFEM, we were actually operating virtually before the pandemic. But I think there are a lot of things that we had to consider, right? So when we're thinking about what makes it collaborative, I think even from the planning, right? So that's when we consider different perspectives, contexts, experiences, and that's not just of the people that might attend, but also the people that will participate or joining as panelists or facilitators. And when you want to make it collaborative, you need to ensure that they're different, very clear from the get-go. the different roles that everyone is going to play. So who is the facilitator, who is presenting, who is taking notes, who is producing? And I think that's something that we learned kind of early on, was that like we have to have someone kind of in the back end doing like the technical aspects of the event or the workshop or the meeting, right? And so that's someone that's checking the chat in Zoom, that's someone who is like splitting people into breakout rooms. I think that sometimes we think that like the facilitator and the moderator can be that one person, but you actually really need to have separate people because it can get confusing. And even also the person sharing their screen as well. I think all of that can be confusing if it's just one person, and that's also a way to make it collaborative, even within your own organizations or networks. I think that also that one of the other things is thinking about co-creating the outline or the event. And so that can be within the panel. So that can be having people, you might invite people as panelists, right? And you might set out your own questions, but bringing them into the process early on, like, okay, this is the idea we have, what do you think? And asking them to input. And also there are ways to even ask your potential participants to join as well. And so setting questions or sending out a survey and asking them, what would you like to learn about? Or what are some questions that you have beforehand? And so that way the presentation or the panel or the workshop can kind of be based off of people's where people are coming from, so their own experiences. And I think that when you're thinking about the actual event itself, like making it inclusive. So I'll talk a bit about inclusivity now. I like that Saira mentioned time zones. And I think that when we're, for COFAM is a global network. And so we have people from all over the world. But I think one of the things that matters for us, and I think even for me personally, is thinking about not just time zones. So you can find like that perfect time where it's like, specifically for an event, right? So for a meeting, you can have meetings at separate times of the day. So like you can have one in the morning, EST, and then in the evening, EST. But when it's an event, you have to also think about like, if it's 6 p.m. like in Australia, and this time also works for people in the US, but 6 p.m. is typically for people with children. That's like dinner time or bedtime. And so kind of also factoring that in and also making sure that people with children can join. I think that when we think about inclusion, sometimes we don't think about people that have children, and we leave out a lot of people that way. And so that's another thing for time zones as well. Some of the other things around inclusion is about translation. I know that Zoom offers that, but it can be pricey. But I think that a lot of things that I would like to see for even events that I attend is, asking people what their needs are, what their accessibility needs are. And that also makes it collaborative, because that the organizers are considering your own personal needs. And that can be from captioning, finding a way for captioning. And I think that we often think of people who are differently abled and can't hear well, but there are people who are neurodivergent and have difficulties focusing. And so even including like an agenda or a visualization kind of we have done earlier here, and letting people know what the outline of the event will be is really helpful as well, because people, neurodivergent people often have a difficult time focusing, and sometimes having a visualized agenda can also help. I know I want to give space for Angela to also add, but there's so much that we can talk about on this. So I'll throw over to Angela, because I was just want to also give Angela space to share some stuff around inclusion as well.
That was great, Z. Thank you so much. And I think that's a perfect place to pick up. So yeah, as Z was saying, at COFAM, we like to think about accessibility. And I loved everything that you were saying about asking people what they need beforehand. And I think you can ask about disability or different types of accessibility needs, but you can also ask, as Z very well said, about preferred time zones, about preferred languages. And I think when you're planning for events, that planning to do these things is important, but also budgeting for them is really important, because sometimes you're going to need to pay for live captioning, for sign language interpretation, and for other specific needs that individuals might have to be able to equitably participate in your event. So I think we talk about planning for them, but a lot of times if somebody requests something, if you don't have the budget, you're kind of scrambling, looking back and forth at where you can potentially source specific vendors from or specific supports from. So that's something I think that's really important, and I really appreciated that you said. I also just wanted to talk a little bit about language and unconscious bias and how that presents itself in all of our presentations, because I think that when we're presenting, we often make assumptions about who is listening. And so often we make assumptions that people can see the screen. Often we make assumptions that people can see the chat box. Often we make assumptions that people can hear. And so I think just removing those assumptions related to disability or related to gender or related to other aspects of identity can be really helpful for promoting inclusive space. At COFEM, a bunch of COFEM team members and the COFEM leadership team put together some internal communication guidelines for members. And if you have a regular space that people are meeting in, I think that can be really nice to have a shared understanding of just values and the language that's preferred by different individuals. And so that's another tip or suggestion that we have. If the space is not shared, but you're coming together for the first time, it still can be nice to talk about just setting collective expectations and values for the space at the beginning of the conversation. And so those are some of the things I just wanted to add to what Z said. Thanks.
And
yeah, I like that you said that. And if it's okay, I'll just add like 1 or 2 more things. I think that having some sort of guidelines or like a code of conduct is also really important. Allowing people to come as they are. So I like to joke that I like to lock myself in a room because of my toddler, but sometimes people don't have that ability to do so, right? And so making sure that it's okay. And sometimes, you know, they might be off mute and you might hear their toddler in the background, and just understanding that we're all living in very interesting times. And allowing people to kind of come as they are and make them feel comfortable with joy and compassion and understanding. I think the other thing that I wanted to mention was around different, I think Angela touched on this a bit, but one of the things, and this is a bit about safety, but I think also is kind of asking about or setting some type of trigger warnings for certain events. I know that those of us that work in the GDV space, even though we are kind of, you know, knowledgeable or have some experience about engaging within the field, but sometimes when you're at an event and you're not really aware that there will be like a live testimony, especially in detail, I think that sometimes people often forget to let participants know that beforehand so that they can know that they can like take a step out at that time, because I think that we don't want to be inflicting trauma on people, especially when we're thinking about, I guess, doing this in a feminist way as well, so that we're trauma informed as well. So that's all I have to add. Yeah.
And I was just going to jump in also with one point about inclusion. Of course, it's always great to ask upon registration for an event when people are RSVPing, is there anything that could facilitate your participation? And of course, we also need to acknowledge that maybe we can't meet every request, but that is good information, at least to keep us thinking as you know, technologies evolve and as our resources, our situation may change. That's still good to be aware of. And also simple things like we're doing here, where, you know, you're keeping the slides very limited, sort of brief text as much as possible, and give people a pause at each slide and read through it. We don't know who has a visual disability, who doesn't have enough bandwidth to be looking at the screen, who has a very small screen. So just making sure everybody can hear what's on the screen and hear what's happening in the chat box in summary, at least.
Thank you all, and I'm really appreciative of the different resources and links that are also going into the chat. We will be collecting all of these and sharing out notes following the event. So if you have resources from your organizations or your experiences that we can all learn from, please include those, and we'll make sure that they're shared out at the end. I'm going to go on to our third question and our last question for the discussion portion here. And this question I will throw to Kenneth and to Ritu. Staying safe online is a challenge for many. What can we do to ensure our virtual events are both interactive and as safe as possible for all?
Kenneth, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure, I can start. Hello, everyone. So that's a great question in a sense where when you think about interactivity with virtual events and more so how technology comes into play, you're looking at the duality of technology, and you're looking at the safety as opposed to more options with the interactivity with some of these platforms. So two lenses to look at it: as a presenter or as an attendee. The first question to consider is, how comfortable am I with the technology that I'm looking to interface with? So definitely try to keep that in mind. And then you want to also choose the right virtual meeting platform. So that comes into play with that. And then another thing I would say is don't assume users know what they're doing or are comfortable with the virtual setting that you're creating for them. So definitely want to make sure that you establish ground rules, check in with the users beforehand, as mentioned earlier. So even with that, as a presenter, you want to keep the attendees in mind, make sure everything is inclusive, be mindful of the topic and the climate at hand while you're going into these different discussions. Perhaps also come up with some security or policies to follow along the lines. Obviously, you can always improve as you go along, but definitely want to keep that in mind. Disable unnecessary features. Don't want to confuse yourself during this time. So you want to make sure that it's in that type of safe space. And don't be afraid to reach out for help to think outside the box. There are a lot of tools that you can incorporate to make sure things are interactive and also safe as well. So I would say don't shoot for the moon. Small increments will be best. You can always improve upon your design as you're moving forward. Yeah.
Thank you, Kenneth. And I would like to add drawing from, sorry, was anybody else going? Okay, thanks, Kenneth. I would just like to add drawing from what you were mentioning and the others were mentioning about being aware of our assumptions, and also the question that we put on Mentimeter, that what makes virtual spaces safe. Both again from the presenter and the participant point of view, I feel that we need to, from the presenter point of view or the organizer point of view, I think we need to make sure that whenever we are organizing any event, we lay out some of the like things to look out for. Say, for example, we will be recording this event, and are you happy for us to record this event? We will be also doing some hashtags or posting this event on some social media. So please feel free to tell us if you're not comfortable with that, or if you do not want us to click your picture. So please feel free to switch off your camera. So I think taking that consent and permission, giving them creating that space for them to say no or yes, however they are comfortable in that situation. Also, I feel one of the things that, welcoming whenever they are coming for any event, welcoming, starting with the self. So that just makes them comfortable as a participant, that all right, the organizer is starting with the introduction, setting some kind of like there are ways, as everybody's talking, that we cannot assume that they have enough bandwidth to speak or switch on the camera. So we can give multiple options that, you can just maybe rename yourself, say your name followed by your country from the organization that you're participating from, or you can also post it on the chat, because not everybody is comfortable equally. They may not have the resources or bandwidth. We also have to be aware of if there are any minors, so make that a declaration or announcement as well, that if you're a minor, please make sure that you switch off your camera. So I think we really need to be very careful about the consent and the privacy part of it, and we need to respect people's silence as well. We always feel like that everybody is can be equally vocal like me, so we need to be aware of the assumption that not everybody can share in the same way, like especially when we go in the breakout rooms and we keep asking, and I might have done that as well, that all right, would you like to share? So I think it's also about respecting that silence of people who are joining. So that's all from my end. I think, Christy, I'll take a pause there.
And one more key thing to take away is to prevent a lot of issues is to confirm all attendees. That would be a key aspect to make sure there aren't people that aren't supposed to be attending the event who can possibly take information if it's a sensitive type of virtual event that's taking place. So just make sure you try to confirm attendees, try to limit who can get in to the specific spaces that you're having.
There's another aspect of safety as well that I think is interesting to consider for certain speakers, for instance. So an Indigenous speaker in a certain context that I had invited to speak gave me this feedback that oftentimes people unintentionally commit violence in the question period, not because they mean to, out of ignorance. And coming from the identity that she comes from, she said, just, giving people a few minutes in breakout to, in small groups, actually discuss their questions reduces that violence when you come back to the, plenary and you do the Q&A. The speaker doesn't get the same level of violence in those unintentional violence on those questions because some of that has been worked out in the small groups. So if you're dealing with sensitive subject matter, of course, there's the practicalities of, maybe you need a password protected space and you need to have registration of every participant, etc. But also for particular people, how can the space be made more safe?
Exactly.
I think I can respond to, I was just typing the response on the chat, but I can add. So Christy, you're also asking us that there are any issues to think about post event. So I feel that what we can do is the first thing first, that we can instantly thank everybody for joining us, taking time out to be part of the session, and then we can lay out some expectations. So you will be you can expect the recording and the notes by this time, and then we can actually send the recording and the notes from the meeting, and we can also then lay out that you may expect, please tune into the social media handles for future posts, and please reach out, creating that space for them also to reach out and give us the feedback if they're not comfortable with something, if we have by mistake we have misquoted something, what possibly they were not saying, or they're not comfortable before it goes out on the public or something like that. So I think that's something to be very mindful of, I feel, post event.
Those are such great suggestions and comments. And I know from SGP's experience, we started hosting gender cafes in 2019, 18. I know Vicky is here, who was one of those presenters, and we've had other members along the way. And each time we learn something new. And it comes from those feedback evaluations usually. Oh, you misrepresented this. You could have done this better. You could have included people from this space or a part of the world, right? So each time we're learning, and I think that through this COVID pandemic and more people working online, we're learning even more. So I really appreciate everyone sharing their experiences today. We are now going to move on to the breakout room portion of this event. We have 3 rooms where many of our members here will help facilitate a dialogue, but this is really a time for you to ask questions, to share your experiences, even to reflect on how the CSW has been operating and what you've learned and taken away from that. We also, in each room, we have people with skills who can teach you, introduce some new strategies and techniques as well. So this is your opportunity. We'll have about 30 minutes or so, at which point we'll come back to the main room and do a quick wrap up. Again, we'll be taking notes, but we will not be recording in the breakout room. So we'll just be taking anonymous notes as we hear from you. So at this point, I will stop sharing my, actually what I will do is I'm going to set up the breakout rooms. And you're welcome to ask questions or have a little conversation as I do that. Sorry, it's just going to take me an extra minute here. Let me recreate the rooms. Okay.
And just as we're waiting, I'll point out that we've shared a number of links in the chat directly and some tools that What I will do is use the virtual collabs hashtag to send them out after this session online. And then the notes that are compiled to the CSW platform will add more complete notes later.
Sounds good. Sorry, the rooms do not seem to be setting up as easily as they ought to be, so I apologize for the extra minute. Here's what we're going to do. Let me recreate them again, and we're going to assign them manually this time.
So once Kirsty assigned the breakout rooms, everyone should receive a message where we will meet in different rooms. I think we should have around 3 rooms, and we can have the discussion whether on one of the topics that we had in the panel discussion, or if anyone would like to share other experiences, other challenges, also everyone is welcome to do so.
Okie dokie. It looks like we're ready to go. You're going to get a breakout room. And for the SGP and COFEM folks, if you find you're not in the right room, please, your co-host, you should be able to move to the right room. So I have in room 1, Hayat and Syra, room 2, Angela and Z, and room 3, Kenneth and Ritu. And for those of you still here, we're happy to have a conversation here, but I can also help you get to a room if you need to move to a room. Amina and Annabelle, I see you're still here. If you'd like to open your mics and introduce yourself, we can talk, or if you prefer, I can move you to one of the rooms.
In our room about inclusion and safety. We talked about everything from planning an event and how to try to be intentional and inclusive in that planning. We also talked about within an event, how to make sure that everybody feels safe. And if there's a point where somebody doesn't feel safe, how to mitigate that. And we had some really nice suggestions and some suggested language to steer people back to how to make a space a bit safer. And so we will be sharing out notes on that and just some of these really great suggestions that were made. We also talked about pronouning and just talked about kind of breaking assumptions about the people that are in the space and the people that are not in the space and how they identify. So I'm happy if anybody else wants to jump in and add anything, but I really appreciated the discussion and I thought it was really interesting and productive. So thank you so much.
Z, did you want to add anything from your room?
Oh no, I was just saying it was really good. I forgot that my video was on. Yes, I was just saying it was really good. Yeah, I Angela kind of gave a great overview of it. And so I think that there were a lot of points that were brought up that we hadn't even brought up ourselves earlier, which is really nice. So stuff around safe spaces and what does that really mean to have a safe space, and making sure that people don't use the label of safe space to be harmful as well. And also setting guidelines as an organization or an organizer of an event, so that you have something to kind of look to when issues come up during your event or meeting.
Great, thank you so much. Daniel, I'm looking at you on my screen next, and I'm not sure all the people in your room, but do you have someone in your room who wants to kick off, or if you want to kick it off?
Kenneth, Inma, Ritu, do you want to go ahead, or should I?
You can go ahead and I can jump in.
You can go ahead. Yeah.
All right, cool. So in our room, we talked about safety and how to make sure that, like, you know, just like that our online safety is on point when we organize. And we just were having a really, really great discussion. We kind of found that there are like a lot of ways that like online meeting platforms can be more safe, more inclusive. We also talked about how like since Zoom kind of blew up last year as well, like it's really gotten better at like making sure that meeting spaces are safe. And yeah, kind of blacking out. Anyone else?
Yeah, so also with the safety, we were able to uncover a lot of ways that we could make the experience more interactive. So pretty much interactive designs that we were kind of thinking of would definitely lead to more people feeling more safe online in these platforms. So some of the ideas we're thinking about, like translation, I'm going blank. I'm not sure if anyone can think of the other ones that we mentioned.
Translation, sign language, translation.
Yes.
Yeah, so if I am speaking in Hindi, the other person can actually hear it in English. So, or yeah, different kinds of translation. We also talked about, I think, challenges, like what kind of challenges that we've come across over the last few months, being online or switching to online platforms. So we had some of the sharing that how password protection is so important for making sure that we have a safe space and nobody is able to barge in. And we also talked about how whether this online virtual space has empowered us or not empowered us. So there was kind of mixed reaction. Some people feel yes, it has empowered us, but a couple of us also felt somewhere in the middle. So yeah, that's all. I think Inma, would you like to add if we've missed out on anything?
No, I think that was great. I think there was something that was nice, that sort of like building the consent in, so that when people access the room, you know, they could automatically say if they wanted to be recorded or if they wanted to, you know, so that the system could just help with that.
Oh, and there was also like compiling the list from the chat room. So with all of the specific resources, if there's a way automatically that it can just be sent to users, because mentioned that there was a lot of rich information in those spaces. And then also continuing small conversations after Zoom, if there were breakout rooms rather than just ending the meeting for all. There could be little spaces where people can go and have continued chats.
I'm really glad you mentioned that. I just put in the chat room that we'll be summarizing all the resources and materials from the breakout rooms, summarized anonymously. And we will upload those into the files section of the CSW event for our event, where we've also uploaded a few other files and resources. They'll also be available on the Gender Professionals website, so you're welcome to go there and access them as well. I want to give Hayat and Saira, your room, a couple minutes to summarize before we close out today.
So yeah, we had talked about reaching diverse audiences through visuals, but we ended up talking both about the visual and the auditory, the hearing, and greater inclusion. And you know, one of the pieces that is very important for us to remember, given the English dominance of our spaces is how notoriously bad native English speakers are about speaking to very diverse audiences. There's an assumption that everybody will understand and follow. And sometimes in global spaces, you see interpreters are really struggling to keep up. So slow it down, really plan out, if it's a very diverse audience, there may be people listening and trying to interpret what you're saying in their third or fourth or fifth language. So really plan out the words then. What language will you use? How will you clarify? Use the slides to clarify if there's acronyms or there's jargon. Language can be different in different places. So to say LGBTQI people in one place is considered inclusive in another place, but you haven't included Two-Spirit, and Two-Spirit should also be there. So knowing who you're speaking to and understanding that we can't, make it perfect for everyone. But, continuing to summarize what's on the visuals briefly, whether it's the slideshow that one is using or the notes that are comments that are being shared in the chat, so that those people who, whether they have visual disabilities or there's technology barriers, they can still understand what's happening even if they can't see the screen and they have to dial in, etc.
Thank you, Saira. So just to one point that stayed in my mind is the clarity. So it's all about clarity, how to ensure that what you are sharing, what you are presenting is clear for people from different places and different languages and different backgrounds. But it was really a nice discussion, and people were interested in the breakout rooms discussion, the small groups discussion, and yeah.
Great, thank you. I'm just pulling up the Gender Cafe website here so that you can see some of the resources that we have. We have a resource page called Gender Cafes, where we'll post the recording of this event as well as all the resources. We also have a second event coming up next week on intimate partner violence and COVID, what employers can do. So please join us there. And then I also want to just share briefly some wrap-up summary points. One, again, we'll be here next week with some of our members who are hosting a gender cafe here at CSW. Come join us for this one as well and continue the networking. And if you'd like to join SGP or follow us, here are all of our information spaces. And I think that concludes our session for today. I want to thank our amazing presenters and panelists and all the people who've been working behind the scenes to make this event possible, as well as all of you for coming today and sharing the resources and your own expertise and experiences. As I mentioned, we'll be summarizing all these notes and sharing them on the SGP page, as well as within the event section of our CSW event. So thank you.
Thank you. It was great.